Well, when I was a kid, I was really into electricity and motors type of things. And in the junior high school I went to in the ninth grade, they had a class that was going to be half radio and half electricity. And I'm saying, oh, I don't want that radio stuff, but I'll take the class to get the electricity things. And when the radio stuff came along, it was like a one-tube radio with vacuum tubes. And I said, whoa, this is cool stuff. And I was hooked just right then and there. And I don't know how I went from that to getting my first amplifier, but I think it had something to do with that shortly after that, I went back to Alabama for a summer visit with one of my aunts, and she gave me a 78 RPM record player that in a box. It was just a record player, not any electronics, and I brought it home, and I took an AC/DC radio, which is something that most people won't know what that means. But suffice it to say, I took the amplifier section of that and coupled this phono cartridge into it, and I took the speaker out of it, of this radio, and put it in an orange crate, and that was my first music playing system.
Wow.
And then when I went to high school, I started taking their radio shop every year, and I was making amplifiers. And some of my friends and I, there was the Santa Barbara County Jump was on the way to Henry's Beach, which is sort of south from where we live right here. And the caretaker of that dump, he had a shack there, and he would collect radios that people would, throw away. And they were all around his shack, and we'd go out there in the middle of the night with our bikes and steal radios and bring them home, and I'd make amplifiers out of it, And so I had various things. In my bedroom, in the house I was living with my mom and sister, there was a closet, a fairly big closet that had sliding doors, and I occupied that space with my stereo, and so I'd listen to music in there, and it was kind of crazy. Yeah, and so when I graduated from high school, I discovered my mentor, Gordon Mercer, who was opening a hi-fi store in town, and I went to work for him for a year after high school, and in the course of that time, he was a great audio engineer and taught me a lot of things, and he encouraged me to be an electrical engineer in that period of time. So the next year I went up to California State Polytechnic College in San Luis Obispo and entered in a double E program. Actually, it was an EL, electronic engineering, as opposed to electrical engineer, which there is a distinction. But most engineers that go and get a double E degree, it applies to electronics depending on what they take.
Sure.
So that sort of got me started, and when I got out of that, when I graduated, I came back to work with a friend, another mentor, Mac W.M. Turner, and got involved with his company that made equipment for a ground station communication with rockets. And after that, I went to another company shortly thereafter called Applied Magnetics that made magnetic recording heads, and the principals of that company had a geophysical exploration background, so they were making recording drums and so forth for those systems. And about the time that I came to work there, they had opened an instrument division to make special purpose tape recorders, and I ended up by making the electronics for quite a few of different, very widely varying machines, for maybe a 4 or 5 year period. And I left that company and went to work for Mac Turner again in his astrometrics research division. And he had an idea, a patent actually, for a servoed loudspeaker that actually worked by sensing. He would coat the cone with colloidal graphite to make it conductive, and therefore the change in movement of that cone to the basket was a variable capacitance. So it was like a condenser microphone, if you will. So it was a displacement sensor of the three variables of motion: displacement, velocity, and acceleration. That was a displacement sensor, and it was sort of valid. There was a lot of leakage. You would get some legitimate low frequency feedback, but as you went up in frequency, leakage would convert it to just plain, a crosstalk. But it all blended within the circuitry to where the bass was servo, then it came into the rest of the range just to be regular amplifier. So we made some of those speakers as a product, and I was charged with taking a pair of them in Mac's Lincoln Continental down to dealers in Los Angeles to try to place them, and get people to buy them. And in one of those visits, Mac happened to come with me, and we ended up by going to Woodland Stereo, which was a fairly famous hi-fi shop in the Valley. And lo and behold, Arnold Nudell was there at the same time because that was an outlet for him. He had the prototype servostatics going there. And so we looked at each other like, "Ooh, what's this?" And we became friends pretty quickly and went up to his house, and that's how I met Arnold before he ever started Infinity. And as I was telling Paul a while ago, somewhere around 1967, I was working for a company called Octron making a displacement measuring device. And their chief engineer had died in a car accident, and I got hired to make this product work. And the company was going to move to New Haven, Connecticut, and I didn't want to go live there, obviously. But I went back there for a couple of months to help them out. And in the course of that absence, my wife had this very laboratory built for me. So when I came back, I basically put up my shingle as a consultant. And I worked for a lot of different companies, BGWs, Marantz. Marantz was an interesting one. When Superscope bought them, they were going to move out to Sun Valley. And Dawson Hadley of Hadley Laboratories, another luminary in the business, I had met him through Gordon Mercer because he would bring his products up to Audio Vision to sell. And he wanted me to consult with them. So he said, "Come on down to this factory and we'll talk about it." And I went down there. The place was totally empty, bare. So I saw that whole place before he started making the subsequent Marantz products there. And then I designed a number of concept ideas for him, preamp equalizers and different preamp circuits. And at one point I got a commission to design a fully, an integrated amplifier that became the Model 1120. And that was an interesting device because I made that output stage quasi-complementary as opposed to the complementary approach that was being used pretty widely at that point. But I wanted this other way, and it was the only product that Marantz ever made that was quasi. But it sounded good, and it was a nice little product. And at some point, I was also a reviewer for Audio Magazine through this period of time. I reviewed a lot of amps and preamps and things and digital things. And at one point, Jim Bongiorno had come to work for SAE, and he had designed several amps, one among them the 3CM. And Audio was going to review that, and I was going to be the reviewer, and Bongiorno was going to bring it up to me physically to get. Well, one afternoon, this Buick Riviera pulls up to the same place that you have your vehicle, Paul. A light blue Buick Riviera, and out steps this gentleman in a total yellow suit, yellow hat, yellow shoes, and I says, "Oh my God, what is this?" Jesus.
Jim Dandy.
Jim Dandy, he was, and so we brought his amplifier in. At the time, I had a nice set of tube amps that were designed and built by an English professor, a good friend of Gordon Mercer's. And I really liked those amps, and I had an A-B switching arrangement. So we hooked up Jim's amplifier, and I got it all working to where we could flip between the two, and we started listening. And I'm saying, "Oh, God, one of these sounds much better to me than the other, and I'll bet you that it's the tube amp." And so I says, "Well, look, Bongiorno, I'm going to shut your amp off. The music's going to keep playing." It didn't. It was his amp. I was stunned. I says, "Oh, man, how could this be?" And so at one point, though, I was, pretty energetic as a woman. I remember saying, "Well, it's kind of crazy," but I was jumping up and down on top of his amplifier and say, "This is pretty goddamn strong. I can't do this with the tube amp." But I said, "Here's the one thing you can do with the tube amp." I started pulling the output tubes on it while it was playing. Bam, didn't hurt a damn thing. But you couldn't pull output transistors like that. So that started a great long-term relationship with Mr. Bongiorno, who was a dear friend. And we spent a lot over the years commiserating. And at some point, he got gas going. He left SAE and put out the Ampzilla as a kit first. And I think the company was going along for maybe 6 months, a year, and he made a proposition to me one time that he asked me if I would come down for 2 or 3 days a week and be his chief engineer. Now, the notion of living and going to Los Angeles was always horrifying to me. I don't like the place, you know, but I said, gee, 2 or 3 days a week, part-time, I might be able to do that, you know. All right. And of course, I was doing some consulting with Infinity at this time, and I knew Arnold really well at this point. And I said, Arnie, you know, Jim offered me this position. It's kind of an interesting proposition. Would you like me on the same basis? And he said, yes. And I immediately said, I'll go with you. I did a lot of things there, all the electronics. I made several FET preamplifier designs that we used for shows, but we never produced. And we made the wonderful hybrid Class A power amplifier, and I did all of the servo electronics for all speakers that had active woofers during that time, and there were a lot of different designs. And other jobs after that, you know, I consulted for Gas and Sumo and BGW and Counterpoint, did things for Mike Elliott, and leading on to later with Conrad Johnson, I designed Premier 350 amp idea for them. And on to, I did work for Constellation Audio and PS Audio over the years, and presently I'm still reviewing things and measuring amps and preamps for Soundstage magazine, that sort of thing. I'm still doing this.